This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear, support your manhood.
Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Joining me this episode is Brett Ciancia from Pix Six Previews as we get his take on the jump the Gators took last season in 2018 and if the Gators will take another jump this 2019 season. Also, a conversation with defensive back commit Tre'Vez Johnson as we take a look at his commitment and upcoming visit plans for the fall. Remember, you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News4Jax sports team. Also catch the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. August 17th, kickoff party here in Jacksonville at the Red Gill Bistro. Gators Breakdown listener James Carlin giving us the hookup on a great location. August 17th, week before Florida and Miami kick the season off. Free admission. We'll have to pay for food and drinks. I'll put an RSVP out on Twitter. But if you don't have Twitter, reach out to me at gatorsbreakdown@gmail.com and let me know if you want to attend. And also, get your Gators Breakdown gear at squadlocker.com. Head over, click in the top right of the screen, click on Find Your Store, and type Gators Breakdown, and all the gear is available right there. Gators Breakdown hats, shirts, and polos, and more at Squad Locker. And I'm happy to be joined by Brett Ciancia from Pix Six Previews right here on Gators Breakdown. Brett, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. I know you made it all the way down to SEC Media Days. It's a big deal, and congrats on that, and congrats on building up the Gators Breakdown podcast. It's one of my podcasts I tune into across the country, and you guys, you're doing a great job.
Thanks much. Those kind words are appreciated, and I'll throw it back at you too. Pix Six Previews, I think, was probably one of my first follows on Twitter and all the. Because look, I kind of built Gators Breakdown on Twitter and the social media world, and I know you guys are heavy in the social media world and especially Twitter as well.
Oh yeah, I have an appreciation for that too. We launched this site in 2012. But it was really the way we spread it was really through Twitter and through passionate college football fans like yourself and your Gator fans and fans across the country. And it really just has been a Twitter movement. I mean, it sounds like you're in the same boat. We're independent guys, not with a major company or any company really at all besides ourselves, and kind of built, great original content and spread it through Twitter. So I have a lot of respect for what you're doing over there too.
Thank you much. And let our listeners know, just in case they don't know about Pix Six Previews, like you say, on Twitter a lot, share a lot of your stats and trends and numbers that go along with college football on Twitter. But let our listeners know what Pix Six Previews is about and what you guys have going on there.
Yeah, thanks. So with Pix Six Previews, it's a college football preview website. We launched in 2012, and over those 7 years, we've been rated the most accurate BCS and Power 5 predictions in the country. I know every magazine claims that, but for us, the numbers don't lie. It's Stassen.com that grades these publications and newspapers and magazines and websites their predictions every year. And since we've launched over that time frame, we are number one, beating out all those that you see on newsstands. And heading into this year, I put together a season preview book. It's available. It's all 65 Power 5 teams, deep write-ups, about 1,500 words, tons of stat graphics. I developed my own advanced stats, stuff like game grader, which we'll get into later in the episode, and player development, win conversion. Basically, what inspired me was I have respect for some of these preseason magazines. I really do, but I do think that some of them don't go deep enough and don't dig in enough to a program. I think we all kind of get the idea that most players are 6'2", 200. You know what I mean? So for other magazines that focus too much on, heights and weights and stats, like you can Google that stuff. I don't need to know that a running back ran for 5.5 yards per carry compared to 5.4 yards per carry. But so basically, I took a step back and wanted to go dig deeper into program histories, offensive and defensive coaching schemes, some X's and O's, really what each side of the ball's goal is, 10-year recruiting trends, stuff like that. So kind of a different angle on the preseason magazine idea. And I thank you for checking it out too. That means a lot. And I saw your tweet on Twitter about it, and I appreciate those words.
Yeah, everybody knows Gators Breakdown was kind of brought about the same way, just something different to put out there, and got heavy on numbers, got heavy on trends, and that's part of where the breakdown name comes from. So I absolutely feel what you're bringing to the table there. And before we dive into the Gators a little bit more, where can our listeners find you? I know you have a podcast out there as well. We mentioned the Twitter machine, but the website, the magazine, the book you just released, and the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. So our Twitter, Dave will be tagging it in his tweets, but it's at Pix Six Previews, all one word. I'll spell it out. Same thing for the website. It's pix6previews.com. And yeah, our 2019 season preview book is on sale now. It's been getting some good reviews. I've been invited all over the place on radio and TV so far. It's booming. And really as a way to give back to Dave and to you as the following, because I can tell that you guys, you've built a good relationship with Dave and the show, and it seems very interactive compared to other podcasts and their listeners. So as an appreciation to you guys out there, I want to extend forward a coupon code. So if you're interested in buying my book, go out to pix6previews.com and just type in Gator or Gators. Either one works, and I want to give a sizable discount and give back to you guys because I can feel the passion from here, and excited to see your feedback on it.
Absolutely, guys. It is absolutely worth it. I got mine a couple weeks ago, and absolutely worth it. A deep dive into numbers, college football trends, history, as he said, recent history, blue blood history, all kind of stuff there for our college football fans. So definitely go check out the Pix Six preview magazine for 2019. As we said, it was just released, and you pegged the Gators as the 8th ranked team coming into the 2019 season. Let's look back a little bit. What impressed you most with what Dan Mullen was able to do in year one, and have that carry over into a top 10 preseason ranking for you this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting back in the coaching carousel a couple seasons ago when you brought in Dan Mullen, I was still pretty high on it. I know it caught some flack from some other SEC fan bases, but really you're bringing in an experienced SEC head coach. And I know some people will point to his win-loss record at Mississippi State as a negative. I view it as a positive. You got to look at the program context over there. Mississippi State historically is a top 50 area team. They're not a top 10 program. They're in that 50 range. So for him to in his final 4 years at Mississippi State, to bring them top 30 in wins and top 15 in my game grader, he really did an excellent job there, and he's probably their most successful coach since World War II. So you fast forward that into what he did at Florida, talking about probably the most improved team in the country. In fact, they are number one most improved team from 2017 to 18 in a ton of my metrics, including my game grader, scoring offense, scoring defense, a ton of efficiency stats, yards per play, that kind of stuff. So very impressed with his turnaround in year one. And then when you dig into it, it's finally a coach has been able to harness the talent pool that's at University of Florida. The talent has always been there on paper, but the last couple of coaching staffs have, failed in player development, scheme, and the whole bit. So I think finally to see Florida harnessing its talent that it has there on campus was intriguing. And I'm a huge believer in the second year boost, where coming into 2019, his second year, you'll see efficiencies on both sides of the ball now that he knows his roster more. The roster is learning his scheme and playbook more, and I'm excited for what's to come at Florida.
So we'll fast forward to your preview of the Gators in your magazine. And at one point, many nationally may disagree, but many Gator fans will definitely back you on. Is you label Felipe Franks as a strength of Dan Mullen's offense and what he brings to the table. Well, of course, we go back to the late game stretch that Felipe Franks was able to put some good things together. Why do you see Felipe Franks as more of a strength for this Gator offense and not necessarily a deterrent as a lot of other people see?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that nationally there are, I don't want to call it laziness, but you really need to dig in deep to these programs. And, from a mile-high view into Florida, you picture what happened under the last staff with Doug Nussmeier. He attempted to slow down that offensive pace. He cycled through, I think it was 5 or 6 QBs in 3 seasons. You got guys like Will Greer, Traylon Harris, Appleby, Del Rio, Malik Zaire even. So, from an outsider's perspective, you look in at Florida and think, oh, the quarterback position's in shambles and they can't lock down that position. So when Felipe Franks started out the 18 season, a little bit of a struggle to start, I think everyone nationally just immediately wrote them off as an offense and him as a quarterback and just chalked it up to be like it has been in the past. But when you dig into it, yes, it was a bizarre moment when he did the whole, the shush noise to the crowd there at home. That was bizarre. But after that, though, I think he kind of got everything off his chest. He matured. And his final 4 games there was 4 wins, first off, most importantly. But really improved in accuracy, 65% completion rate over the last 4, 8 touchdowns, 0 picks. So you really saw an improvement there to end the season, and I think that you're going to see a big development from the end. So that progress from the end of 18 into 19, because Dan Mullen's also a pretty proven quarterback developer from what we've seen. So, yeah, so while the national media and maybe some other SEC fan bases might knock on Franks, I think there's enough there at the end of the year to think that he makes the jump up to maybe number 3 in the SEC. He's definitely in that pack with Joe Burrow and Kellen Mond for the 3, 4, and 5 spots at SEC quarterback.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see which 3 of those guys either elevate their game or I expect all 3 of them to elevate their game. Actually, I guess how much do all 3 elevate their game and where they go? They all 3 have tough schedules. They all 3 play similar defenses. There with Florida having to play Auburn and LSU out of the West. There, Florida gets the break of not having to play Alabama's defense, but we'll have to deal with Georgia. But A&M has to deal with all those teams. So that schedule is a little brutal. And you brought up a good point. Doug Nussmeier slowing down the offense, and you go back even before that, and Will Muschamp and all the offensive coordinators that he brought to the table, and it was try to play in a phone booth. Not necessarily. Not necessarily spreading defenses out, not spreading your own offense out, and using the speed of Florida to your advantage. Same, you mentioned McElwain and Nussmeier just slowing down the offense. It was just slow, downtrodden offenses that Dan Mullen knew what to expect with this Florida fan base and what the fans expect with putting points on the board, and just going back to your point of not necessarily and kind of not necessarily just for the sake of it, changing what Doug Nussmeier or Jim McElwain did, but come in, installed his offense. He knew what he wanted to do, and eventually, as you said, Felipe Franks. It kind of, and I always labeled it as that 4-game stretch. We all go back to Felipe Franks went from being that Jim McElwain quarterback to a Dan Mullen quarterback.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a good point, too. I mean, you look back at the Muschamp offense, like, I'm trying to think of what was his real offensive scheme for his staff, but it basically turned out to be, how can I hurt my defense less? So whether that be just ball control or just melting clock, even in a close game or when he's trailing, it was bizarre. And you see that still at South Carolina. I know they're trying to evolutionize the offense there, but it's going to take some time. So I think finally, like I said at the top, is finally you have a staff and a proven staff at that, that's able to harness this raw talent on paper. Over the last 5 years, their 5-year recruiting average is number 13 nationally. And when you look at just the last 3 years, that boosts up to the top 10 roster talent. So while prior staffs were squandering that, I think that finally you have a staff that's improving on it and even exceeding the expectations. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited, and we'll get into it next about the skill players that he has around him. That I think that's why I view him even higher in 2019.
Yeah, you mentioned the skill players, and you mentioned the recruiting rankings there, and what that doesn't factor in is the transfers. Florida got in with Van Jefferson and Trevon Grimes there at that deep receiver unit that Florida has. But you make sure to point out that there are 2 players that turned that unit from good to elite in Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I went through my my unit rankings, first you want to look at star power at the top. But then you also want to look at depth. And when it shakes out, I actually had Florida as my number 5 wide receiver tight end crew in America, and that's only number 2 in the conference behind Alabama. Which, I mean, that's like an All-American list at receiver. I think, in fact, they swept the All-SEC at receiver. I think it was all 3 of them got spots. But anyway, in terms of Florida, a lot to like here. You start with Van Jefferson at the top. He's the leader with Josh Hammond coming back. But really 2 blue chip guys, Jacob Copeland and Trevon Grimes. both top 100 guys in the past are now getting into the mix more. You have Freddie Swain, a good route runner. But really, like you said, it's these two guys, these Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts. With Toney, I mean, he's your do-it-all guy. He's your speedster. You get on the ball in a variety of different ways, end around, screens, even some wildcat I can maybe foresee coming. But really, he's your X factor and do-it-all guy. Every buzzword you could use, I probably just used 5 buzzwords right there, but they all apply here. And but then really, this is a guy that many aren't talking about nationally, Kyle Pitts, 6'6" beast. I kind of have some insider information on him. He's so I'm located in the college football black hole of Pennsylvania, the East Coast, the Northeast. But he was a local recruit out of here, and I actually watched him in the PA Final Four in high school football in 2017. He was playing for Archbishop Wood, and they went up against my alma mater, Unionville, and the guy was an absolute beast. He stood out right away. You could tell he was a Division I recruit, and then we looked into it further, and we could tell that the SEC was all over him. Yeah, he's just an absolute monster. I think you're going to see him start to take over in a bigger role here as he's progressing in his career at Florida. I think he's a huge mismatch across the middle against these defenses. So, yeah, that whole package right there, that's unbelievable firepower for Franks to play with this year. And a second year with Mullen's scheme like we touched on. I think it's going to be a great thing down there.
Yeah, we got excited in the springtime when we got to see, the emergence of Kyle Pitts a little bit. He was being used more. We got to see him as a receiver more. And going back to Dan Mullen's time at Mississippi State, he likes those big body, can go up, can control, with control, go up and get the ball, but somebody who can physically manhandle defensive backs. So, he likes those big bodied wide receivers. So, the Gator fans are definitely excited. We're definitely excited to see what Kyle Pitts can bring to the table. Bring him closer to the line. You can split him out wide. Versatile type of big guy, big bodied receiver there. Of course, we kind of it's not all positive on the Gator offensive front. Not necessarily to say this next position group with the offensive line isn't a positive, but it's more just a question mark. We don't know yet. We think that the starting 5 can be pretty good with offensive coordinator or offensive line coach John Hevesy and what his development history brings to the table. But how big of a worry is that offensive line for you?
Yeah, well, one last thing on Pitts real quick is if you guys are getting excited watching him against other SEC caliber players in the spring, imagine how much of a standout he looked to me in rural southeast Pennsylvania. My God, it reminds me of another, because it's rare for guys out of our area to go SEC. So the most recent guy besides him was actually DeAndre Swift out of Philadelphia, and to see him breaking out, and I think that Kyle Pitts will have a similar breakout because they were both 4- or 5-star guys out of our region. And it's rare when the SEC comes knocking, and those coaches know better than our guys up here. So that's a pretty big endorsement to get offers from those teams. So I think you're in for an absolute playmaker. At offensive line, yeah, it's a little bit of a worry, but so 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen starters from last year are gone. I think that with the recruiting pool that you guys have there, there's a ton of buzz around John Hevesy there at offensive line coach. I think that the starting 5 will be fine. I think that won't be an issue. My issue with it, though, is past that. I think that depth might be a concern. Linemen especially is a roster unit that you want depth because you can obviously rotate guys. Injuries happen, it seems like, all the time across offensive line. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you go down in fall camp, it just happens, So I do worry about the depth there once you get past that starting line. So we'll see. I think that it's going to put a little bit more pressure on Franks, but I think that at the same time he's ready for a little bit more. So, it's definitely the only concern of the offense, and that's if injury bug strikes.
Brett Ciancia of Pix Six Previews joining us right here on Gators Breakdown as we move to the other side of the ball. And reading your preview, it looks like you're a fan of Todd Grantham, his history the last few years at Louisville and Mississippi State, what he did and what he can do for this Florida defense.
Yeah, I'm a huge Todd Grantham fan. I mean, you have to look back at his prior stops. 3 years at Louisville, it was he turned around a pretty bad situation and made it into that 10 or 11 win season with Lamar Jackson Heisman run. It was a strong defense on the other side of the ball too for him. And you also see once he leaves, an absolute collapse of a defense. So it's important what the guy does there, but also the impact that he leaves. One good example I have is Brent Venables at Oklahoma, where before his Clemson run, everyone talks about that, but at Oklahoma, he had that Big 12 defense consistently in the top 25 defensively. And you see that after he leaves, Oklahoma just has absolutely tanked on the defensive side of the ball. So his departure speaks a lot to his actual coaching talent there. So in the same sense with Todd Grantham, you see an absolute collapse at Louisville after he leaves. He heads down to Mississippi State, builds up a very solid defense. I think a lot of those guys just got drafted along the defensive line. And then last year, just tons of improvement, like I mentioned at the top. Also, Florida's defense improved in all 13 of my defensive stat metrics, really across the board. Passing defense was especially elite, top 20 in every category. So, yeah, I'm very impressed. I think that despite losing the 3 NFL early guys with Ja'Kai Polite, Boshawn Joseph, Ciancia Johnson, I still do think that there's so much talent there. I think that secondary, too, is just absolutely loaded. So it's just a matter of where you want to put everybody. I know that's a talking point for fall camp coming up. But you know what? When you take a step back, I previewed all 65 programs. That's a good problem to have. Let me just tell you that, because when you go from writing about, say, Wake Forest and then to Florida, oh, my God, the talent just abounds down here.
And I've said it before on the podcast too. We definitely slammed Jim McElwain and the recruiting that it wasn't up to Florida standards there. But going into this year and looking at your unit rankings and the other preview magazines unit rankings and stuff, Florida's up there. On the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball with the talent they bring back. Of course, that's counting transfers as well that Dan Mullen was able to bring in, and Van Jefferson and Trevon Grimes, as I mentioned earlier, and Jonathan Grenard, who's the transfer from Louisville, who played there or was recruited there by Todd Grantham. I mean, as much as we slam McElwain, there looks like there's still enough talent to make a run here in the 2019 season. So, would it be a total shock if it was Florida representing the SEC East in Atlanta and not Georgia?
No, I wouldn't be shocked at all. I mean, I think that you played Georgia pretty tough through, the first half, maybe the first 3 quarters. It was a competitive game, and that was still before we saw kind of the awakening of Frank. So I think that, it's definitely a possibility. I have the number 8, and that would be good enough to win most divisions across the country, quite honestly. But in the SEC, that's good for 2nd in the East or 4th overall, so it's tough. But no, I think that I'd be less surprised with Florida in Atlanta than I would be any other team besides Bama coming out of the West, if that makes any sense. So maybe like with Georgia being a 65-35 chance of winning, I would say that Alabama's probably a 90 or 95% out of the West. So, yeah, I think they have a legit chance.
And, looking at that, and of course, a lot of that, doesn't necessarily translate in the SEC, Florida and Georgia there, but the game week 1 won't necessarily play into how, who represents the East in Atlanta, but it is that big week 1 matchup that's only about 3 weeks away now as college football inches closer, and the kickoff versus Miami. How do you look at that game? I know you have Miami picked to win the Coastal in your magazine here. So as you kind of mentioned, though, not all schedules are created the same there. And you were comparing SEC schools, and maybe Florida could win many divisions out there. Well, Miami, pretty much can win, pegged to win the Coastal, even though it's Manny Diaz's first year. A lot of change going on there, especially on the offensive side of the ball. When we look at this game just a few weeks away now, should we expect a hard-fought matchup between 2 rivals here, or one where Florida is just too much and kind of controls that game throughout?
Yeah, this one I'm really looking forward to for many reasons. One being, finally we got a big week 0 game. I mean, you wait so long, you watch all the film in the spring games, and you rewatch old great games from 10 years ago. You're watching classic games, and finally when week 0 gets here, they give us like Arizona, Hawaii, or something like that. Which, you know what, I'm still excited for. Don't get me wrong, but not like this, man. You have a return of an old rivalry, an in-state power rivalry here. So I think that if you asked me this back in November or October, I'd have probably said Florida by 2 scores, maybe even by 3 scores, just blowing them out. But I've grown a lot on Miami since the coaching change when you break it down, because the one thing they did great over the last couple of years was defense, was that Manny Diaz, blitz-heavy attacking defense. So with him being promoted from within, roundabout through Temple, but you know what I mean, that defense is still there. So that's going to be very strong. It was the offense that was holding them back, which is ironic, being that it was Mark Richt and the old quarterback guru couldn't get a quarterback to throw the ball. So offense was holding them back. But I love the hire they made with Dan Enos coming out of Alabama. He was going to be the next guy to fill in at offensive coordinator for Saban, with Mike Locksley departing for his hometown Maryland program. So Enos was next in line for Saban, which is probably the biggest endorsement in college football, right? So for Miami to pluck him out of there was a major win. And I think you'll see some sustained quarterback play finally. I mean, they have raw talent there in all three guys. It's just a matter of getting consistent play out of one of them. So I think that'll click. In my preseason book, I have Miami, their defense, their front seven especially is loaded. Their linebackers are number 2 in the country as a unit. And that's a result of a couple guys turning down the NFL and coming back early, and Shaq Quarterman and Michael Pinckney. And then up front, they have a guy, John Garvin, who could be a future first or second round pick. And even Miami of all programs, quote unquote, they won the transfer portal of 2019. Yeah. It's kind of a new phenomenon that we had to deal with this year with our preseason logic. But I mean, they had such an influx of talent. It's a matter of if they can all band together. So I'm pretty high on Miami, which is crazy. Like I said back in November, I would have laughed at it. But I think now I look at it as maybe Florida by a score. I think it's going to be extremely physical. And I think it's going to also, I want to throw this in there, that I think I'd love to see the Twitter fan bases just go off for the whole week leading up to it. I know that's been pretty bitter. People ask me always like, oh, what's the most bitter rivalry in college football? And a lot of the national pundits just always say Michigan, Ohio State, or Oklahoma, Texas. But outside of BYU, Utah, which there's crazy guys up there, they're talking every day of the year about it. I think the Florida Big Three, really, it's kind of a three-way. Just I picture the three fan bases in kind of the octagon, just beating each other up all season. And it's quite a treat as an outsider, to be honest. I love tuning into that stuff. So yeah, I'm just excited for so many different reasons for this big game to start out the season.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and it's so weird that you talk about the big three, and it's rare that they're all three good at the same time. You had Miami in the 80s, and FSU was kind of building towards what they were going through in the 90s. And then by the time Florida and Florida State caught up to Miami kind of went away a little bit in the mid to late 90s before they picked it back up again. Late 90s, early 2000s, and FSU kind of dropped off there before Bowden went away. So yeah, I'm kind of waiting for those big three to kind of have 1 year where they're all only looking at 1-2 losses on the season. It's rarely happened there, and as you mentioned, it's already ugly on Twitter. The fan bases already can't stand each other. But I couldn't imagine where all three would be good at the same time.
Yeah, that would be incredible. I mean, even if just one of them's good, you can see the passion and the fire on Twitter, which is representative of the whole fan base. I think that from a national level, I think this is an opportunity for Florida to really pounce on it, because I'm not a big fan of Willie Taggart and what he's done in 1.5 years there. I know that his offensive coordinator hire at Bryles could be good. We don't know yet. Last year was an absolute train wreck for Florida State. So I think it's an opportunity for Florida to really pounce on the in-state talent. Miami, I guess, going through a transition. We'll see how they turn out this year, but it really looks like Florida is the premier program right now. I know that as it goes in college football, that could change in the blink of an eye. But as of right now, I mean, Florida is in a great spot. One thing I did research into, and I should have pulled this up before the episode, but I looked back kind of when you were talking about those peak years of the late 90s, early 2000s, the percentage of top 10 players out of Florida, like 5-star and high 4-star guys that were contained by the Big Three, held in state, was very high. I think it was 90-something%. But then I look back at the same metric over the last 5 years, and you're seeing a lot more exodus of players out of the state. A lot of programs coming in and snatching the top dogs out of Florida, like Bama, Georgia, Clemson, even Ohio State is coming in and getting some guys. So I thought it was just a cool, because I'm fascinated by recruiting on so many levels. But that was just a cool kind of geographic breakdown where, not cool for you guys. I'm just saying, as a national guy, to see the shift in, what used to be, hey, you're a Florida 5-star, you're going to one of the Big Three, you're locked down. Now people in other programs have been able to infiltrate a little bit. So we'll see if you guys could build the wall or build the fence. What do they call it? Miami called it the state of Miami.
Yeah.
You could just really lock down Florida as a state. All three of them would be top 10 teams every single year.
Yeah, and that's what it takes. That's what it's going to take for one of those three, and that's what I've pounded about recruiting too. Florida's supposed to, if Florida's going to get back to competing on the Alabama level and lately the Georgia level, of beating them in the East, and you got to keep some of that talent in state more so than what has been done recently. And yeah, I think it is a big point of emphasis in taking the next step under Dan Mullen and getting that state of Florida talent because as you mentioned, Ohio State comes down here to Jacksonville and picks kids from Trinity Christian and Georgia's getting their quarterback out of Jacksonville this year and two Jacksonville area kids out of Oakley are heading to Miami. So and now we can go to Lakeland and DeMarcus Bowman's committed to Clemson, who a big running back target for Florida. Maybe some thought would a year ago would be a shoe-in to the Gators, but now heading to Clemson. So yeah, you're right. That has definitely for the big three, but more specifically for what we're talking about here. Florida's got to keep those in-state guys for sure.
Yeah, especially Lakeland. I think that's really your pipeline, right? I saw three guys put hats on last year on National Signing Day from there for Florida. So yeah, I mean, you got to really start to lock down the state even more. I know that I think it was number 13, like I said, number 13 5-year recruiting rank. It's solid, but in the SEC, that's only good for top 5. So I think that really an emphasis on in-state recruiting heading into 2020, 2021, really see how Dan Mullen can do, because I think that Florida has all the firepower in the world, the geography, the conference affiliation, and now if you have the staff, the proven staff, you can start stacking 10 or 11 win seasons. There's no reason there shouldn't be a recruiting power in the top 5 every year, kind of like what you're seeing from Bama and Georgia currently. So all the makings are there. On other shows across the country, I go on and I try and I discuss the program. The one thing you can't change is geography, right? Yeah. You guys have it as good as anyone. So, I was just out in Nebraska talking about recruiting, and it's like, you know what? You got to go coast to coast. You got to go outside even your 500-mile radius, let alone a 5-mile radius down or whatever it is in Florida. So, so you have the geography, you have the history, you have the passionate fan base, obviously. And now with the coaching staff that can finally harness all of that, I'm pretty excited with what Florida's building.
Right before I let you go, I know you and I discussed it a little bit last week on Twitter. I wish I could pull the trigger, but I'm as high on them. I think is not quite as high as you are, but I am very high on the Utah Utes as well. And you got them, and you've pegged them for that surprise team to make a run towards the college football playoff.
Yeah, you're right. I went all in here. I saw a lot of people putting them as a sleeper, quote unquote, or a top 10 or top 15, but I went all in because I really broke it down as there's 4 spots for 5 leagues. I have Clemson, as pretty much a shoe in there. There's not much competition out of the ACC, so they're a clear number 1. I actually have Georgia coming out of the SEC this year. You look at the last 2 times against Alabama, the national title, they had a 95% win probability. They should have won that game. There's no way around it. And the same deal with last year in the SEC title game, that was an 85% win probability. So it's not even really a hot take to say that should have been 2-0 for Georgia, and we're talking about a national title and maybe even 2. So I think that they're right there. Basically what I'm getting at is they're right there. They finally broke through and stopped Nick Saban's 10-year streak at number 1 recruiting. They have the raw power. They have the number 1 offensive line, the best backs. Jake Fromm's incredible against top 30 defenses. So, yeah, I went Georgia out of the SEC. I went Ohio State over Michigan out of the Big Ten, going against the grain there nationally. Everyone has Michigan. Mm-hmm. And then for the 4th spot, really, this is the money pick, right? It came down to Utah, my Pac-12 champ, or my Big 12 champ, Texas, which that's a topic for another day. I'm going to get roasted on Twitter for that pick, but I have the facts to back it. Anyways, I think that Texas will lose lose against LSU in the non-conference, and I think that they'll split with Oklahoma, resulting in a 2-loss Big 12 champ, leaving that 4th spot for the Pac-12 champ. And when you break it down with Utah, they were a lot better than their record last year. Mm-hmm. They won the South Division despite losing their starting quarterback and workhorse starting running back, Zach Moss. The defense is just absolutely incredible. And in my other metrics I use, my win conversion stat and my player development stat, Utah consistently is number 1 or number 2 in both of those. So this basically getting at that their staff is incredible with getting them to play above their expectations in recruiting. And lastly, the schedule really sets up nicely. It is an easy non-conference slate. And in the cross division up there, they actually miss Oregon and they miss Stanford. So they can even go and lose at Washington in week 10 and win the rematch in the Pac-12 title. And I think a 12-1 Utah gets that nod over a 2-loss champ or a 1-loss runner-up elsewhere. So that's a little bit of the logic behind it. I go a lot more in depth in the book and on Twitter. So that's where I ended up with Utah there.
Yeah, and we've kind of compared teams from around the nation to the SEC a little bit here in this episode. And what I will say, that Utah defensive front, that is an SEC defensive front for this season.
Oh, absolutely. And by saying it's an SEC line, it's basically an NFL line, right?
Yeah.
Bradley and I and Lecky Fotu are both, I think, will be high NFL picks there at Utah. And then they had a guy, Max Tapai, a freshman last year, who really came on halfway through the year. His last 6 games were incredible. So I think that coming back, and then just a lot of depth behind those top 3 guys. They can rotate 11 guys there and still not miss a beat. So, I'm really high. They're actually rated as my number 1 defensive line in the country, and their secondary isn't a slouch either. So I think behind a really stout defense, I mean, almost perfect level of defense up there. Great proven track record with the coaches, and then 4th-year starters at quarterback. Tyler Huntley's back healthy. Zach Moss could be a 2,000-yard back. And then a stable of receivers that's all back. So there's a lot to like. Easy schedule. And I hate to throw this also in there, this intangible, but how many years can the committee keep out the Pac-12? I mean, if they're not going to allow in a 1-loss Pac-12 champ, that's almost labeling the conference as second rate and not even a Power 5 anymore. So I think, and you can look at what Oklahoma did last year. They went 12-1 out of a pretty weak Big 12. They had an easy non-conference slate. And they lost to Texas in the regular season, but won that rematch on Championship Saturday. That was enough to boost them into the playoffs. So I think Utah takes a similar route with Oklahoma last year, which was a down Big 12. You had 4 coaches fired or retired. So I think that the Pac-12 gets a team in if it's a 1-loss champ, and I think it'll be Utah.
So there we go. That is the type of coverage you would get from Brett Ciancia at Pix Six Previews. Brett, one more time, where everybody can find you on Twitter and the website and the magazine.
Yeah, thanks. So it's at Pix Six Previews. It's all spelled out on Twitter, and it's pix6previews.com. And like I mentioned at the top, I'd love to offer a coupon code to get the Gators this magazine. Just type in Gators at checkout, and make sure to give me and Dave a shout on Twitter and tell us what you think. So I appreciate you having me on. I really respect what you build over there from the ground up, kind of like we have on our side, and love the passion from your fan base too. So best of luck this year.
Thanks, Brett. Pix Six Previews right there, Brett Ciancia. Brett, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Before we move on, guys, you have got to try UFM underwear. Don't worry, you won't see me modeling in any underwear. You don't need that. But what you do need is a pair of UFM underwear. Underwear for Men is the only brand of men's underwear that offers both isolation and support. Unlike other pouch underwear brands that have thin mesh panels or pre-sized pouches, Underwear for Men's patent pending design prevents skin-on-skin contact and eliminates chafing. UFM underwear is designed to move with your body so you can easily go from one activity to the next without ever having to think about your underwear. At least until it's time to order some more. The State of Florida company has you covered no matter the activity. Everyday underwear, athletic underwear, work underwear, medical underwear, Underwear for Men is made for it all. Try your pair now. Head over to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN to get $5 off your pair. UFM Underwear. Support your manhood. Tre'Vez Johnson from Barton Trail, cornerback commit for the Florida Gators right now, joining me here from High School Media Day here in Jacksonville, Florida. Tre'Vez, thanks for joining us here on Gators Breakdown.
How you doing?
Good. All right, been committed to Florida for a little while. Let's go back just a little bit. You camped, had the 7-on-7 session there. What sold you, and what sold the coaches to offer you there on the spot?
They said that they liked my versatility. I mean, I ran a good time at the 42, so they just said they liked what I brought to the table. They offered me that day. Everything kind of happened kind of quick, but it ended up offering me, and that was that.
Was it a hard decision? Like once the offer came, how long did you have to think about it?
A week. I mean, I committed the next weekend, so I was excited. I was shocked, but I knew once I got it that was probably somewhere I wanted to be.
You talked about the coaches and what they saw. So what was it? Coach Torian Gray, he's there, coaching the DBs. Florida's got the DBU moniker to live up to. What was it about Gray that probably helped you make the decision?
He's Coach Gray. He's a cool dude. He's just like a friend to you. So, I mean, talking to him, it was just like talking to one of my friends. But, I mean, I love the coaching staff there. I'm comfortable there. It's obviously where I want to be.
Well, what is it about Florida, but just besides they got the football program, of course, too. Was there more to it than just football?
Definitely. I mean, that's getting education from Florida. That's another plus. So, it was mixing football and academics I don't think I could have got any better than that.
So you'd probably be looking at that nickel star role that Florida has in that defense. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson played that role last year. Do you see yourself just kind of, in a way, freelancing out there and just trying to make some plays?
Mm-hmm. I'm ready to get on the field any way I can, so wherever they want me to play, I'll play. Yeah.
You mentioned you're a versatile type of player. Do you feel comfortable moving around if you have to move around?
That's no problem at all. I mean, like I said, any way I can get on the field, wherever they want to put me, they can put me there.
So you just visited this past weekend as well, Friday Night Lights camp. A lot of recruits, a lot of commits for Florida on campus. Just talk about the camaraderie and the connection that you guys have.
Oh, it was great. I mean, we were around each other the majority of the time, but it was great. Coach Mullen came in, took pictures with us. It was just a good energy. Everything. This whole weekend was good.
You just mentioned Coach Mullen, of course, turned the program around in year one. Was there a lot of looking at what he did in year one that went into your decision to commit to Florida?
Not really. It was just kind of the opportunity, and Coach Mullen actually cares about us as who he's recruiting. So it wasn't. I didn't technically look at last season. I just kind of looked at the future and what Coach Mullen brought to the table. And he's a great coach. The whole coach staff is great coaches. So I loved it. Everything about it, I loved it.
How's it been around Jacksonville since you committed to the Gators? Of course, a Gator-heavy town. Florida looks to make inroads and get better in recruiting in the city of Jacksonville and surrounding areas. Just talk about how you've been treated around the city, school, and all that after committing.
Nothing really changed. Just a lot more congratulations. Like people you don't even know congratulating you. But other than that, it's just like it's the same.
What about visits coming up this fall? Is it Florida's going to be your only visit? And how many times are you looking to maybe go up on campus?
Hopefully every Saturday I'm trying to go to a game, but I don't think I'd be visiting anywhere else other than that. But I'm just trying to make it to a few games. Probably take my official in the fall, but other than that, nothing really much going on there.
All right, that'll do it for Tre'Vez Johnson here at High School Media Day. And that'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. Thanks to Brett Ciancia and Tre'Vez Johnson for joining us here on this episode. Ramping up the coverage with football season. Gators in camp for a week. All the other teams kicking off camp just a few days ago. Gators Breakdown will be going to 3 episodes a week, so look out for another episode tomorrow where Will Miles and I will take a look at the Gators schedule, what the Gators have to prove. We'll take a look at some fall camp notes, and then also we'll be taking a look at some opponent previews coming up as well as we count down the days till Florida and Miami kickoff. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.